We once again dive into the realm of background simulations, and today we're going to talk about expansions, investments, and how you're going to take over a new system. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Elite Dangerous with Down-to-Earth Astronomy. Today we're going to dive into the BGS guides again. I haven't done one in a while, so I thought it was about time that I went back to it. And today we're going to talk about how you get your faction, your player faction, to expand into a specific system that you've decided on, and how you control the whole expansion thing. And as an example today, I'm going to be using this channel's community's own player faction called downtoearthastronomy, which of course you're more than welcome to join. Just follow the link for Discord and find the TerraX channels over there, and you will be able to get all the information you need. Now, you can see here that we are currently in two systems. We are Nagatuvin, and we are in our home system, of course, LP. So, for today's example, we are going to imagine that we want to expand into this system, CE35. It's not currently on our expansion target list, but I'm going to use it as an example regardless. It's a very big system. There's a ton of stations. And we're going to come back into what we actually need to get into the system. Now, the way you get your faction to expand is to hit over 70% influence. So if we go back to our copy, we're going to LP. You can see here that we have definitely had our peak here, where we peaked over 70%, and this is when we had our expansion into Nagatuvin. Because when you go over 70%, you can begin to trigger the state called expansion, and this is the state at which you will expand into a new system. Now, of course, as you make your way up to 70% in a system, you're gonna be passing the 60% market, as we talked about last time. When you do that, you will initiate a conflict, or you will most likely initiate a conflict if they're not in a conflict anywhere else with the controlling faction in the system. So if you're not already in the controlling faction in the system, just be prepared for that you are going to get into a conflict before you manage to get to those 70%. But let's just, for the sake of this, imagine that you have already the controlling faction in a system, and you have now made it to 70%, and you are now ready to begin preparing for this expansion. Now, it might not happen right away, because if we have a look at this little diagram here, we can see here that expansion is a second tier state, and that means that every state that's a tier higher can block it. That means war, civil war, and elections. So all conflict states. So if you're in multiple systems, if you are in a war or a conflict anywhere else, even if it's another system, in another system, you'll be blocked by doing your expansion in your current system. So you need to clear those wars first. You need to get out of those wars. You need to be free of those before you can get your expansion. So once you got your expansion, and it's now gone into a pending state. So you're now pending expansion. You can see here from this here that it gives you a 5-day pending. So that means you have to wait 5 days where this state is pending, and needs to be continuously pending for those 5 days. So if you're within those 5 days, the state can be overruled by a war. So again, if someone manages to pull you into a war while the state is pending, it will override it, and you will have to go through it again. So you need to stay out of wars. This, of course, makes it gradually more complicated to expand the more systems you have, because if you have a lot of systems, there's a good chance that you're going to end up with an accidental war in some systems, unless you have a lot of people to keep track of all those. So you need to just take care where you expand, and don't just expand into any random system that you find. So once your 5-day pending is over, we go into the actual length of it, which is 5 to 6 days. After the end of that period, you will expand into the nearest available target that you can expand into. The nearest available target is going to be, let's go and have a look here. Now, we are now in LP, and let's see, this is the system that we wanted to expand from. We can then see all the list of nearby systems, and the maximum number of factions that could be in a system is 7. I know this one here with 8, I'll come back to that in a bit, which is actually our expansion target, is 7. So we simply just go down the list. Here we see 7, 7, 7, 7, 8, 7, 6. So in this case, if we were to expand right now, we would go into Wukub Huan, because this is the nearest system available with only 7 or less, with less than 7 factions. So in our case, if we wanted to expand into the CD system, we would need to clear some space for us. Now, the reason why this system here has 8 factions is because it previously had 7, and then a player group, as you can see here, we just call them the Wine Drinkers, Collective Wine and Spirit Company. I believe this is an inactive, at least when we've been keeping an eye on them, they seem to be inactive. They always hover down here around the 5-6%. They don't really move. They don't seem to do any significant changes. So I believe these are inactive. We of course need to kick some factions out of the system. If we want to have a seat in the system, we need to make a seat for ourselves first. And because there's already 8 factions, we need to kick out 2 of the existing factions. Now, you can't just kick out any faction that you want. You can only kick out non-native factions. Now, a native faction is the faction that has the home system in the system you're in. So, for instance, if we go back to our faction here, Terra X, our home system is LP. So we can never be kicked out of LP. However, we can be kicked out of Akatuvan because we are not native to Akatuvan. Okay. Let's head back into, where did it go? There we go, CD. Let's back into CD. So we can see here all these CD35. These are most likely, these are native factions. This would be native, this would be native, and now these guys are also native because they were created in this system. So that means we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 native factions. So that means that if you wanted to expand into the system, you would have to go and kick out Uniting Aquari and Independent Akatuvan Laborer. Those are the only 2 non-native factions in that system, so we have to kick those guys out. Now, in order to kick the people out, we have to look at the state Retreat. First of all, we can see that Retreat is a second-tier state. Again, it's an expansion state, so that means that this state can also be blocked by wars. So while people are in Retreat, you need to keep them out of wars elsewhere. And we can see here that the Retreat only has a 1-day pending. Then it has a 5-day where it is doing Retreat. And after those 5 days are gone, the faction will be pushed out of the system. Now, you are in threat of going into Retreat if your influence in the system is less than 2.5%. So if we head back to the system here, we can see that Independent Akatuvan Laborer is actually already under the 2.5%, so these would probably be a good candidate to kick out pretty quickly. But we can see here if we click on them that there's a little red marker here on in Akatuvan itself. So if we go in here, we can see that Independent Akatuvan Laborer currently have a pending war. So this would most likely be a blocking war for us, preventing them from retreating from the other system. So if you want to kick those guys out, you would have to, of course, we would need to clear this war first. So we would probably go in and kick their ass and make sure we win this war if we want to go into CD. Once that war is cleared, we would have to go back and look at their other system, carefully managing these. We can see some of them here in Aquari. They seem to be pretty close. See, they are close to these guys. There's a lot of activity around the 10 to 20 areas. So there's a good chance that random wars are going to pop up here. With they're in 5%, there's a chance. So we might actually want to work with them in Aquari to push them up over, like say, over 20%, 25%. So we put them well clear of anybody else. So they don't get into an accidental war here. And then once we cleared all the wars, we can then begin to look into getting that retreat. So they will leave CD. Once we're done with that, we can then take United Aquari, do the same thing. And in order to lower their influence, you can do several things. One thing you can do is to, if there's a controlling faction, so if it's a non-native controlling faction, you just shoot the cops to the system and they will lose influence very quickly. But if they're not, the most effective way is probably to try and engineer a war. So in this case, we can see we already have civil wars here, we have civil wars here. So in this case, I would probably say we could try and engineer a war between Defense Force of CD35 and United Akatuvan. So we would need to move these guys a little bit closer to each other, so they would be within the 5%, and try to do a crossing of the stream to try and force that war. But of course, they can only be in one war at a time, so we would have to make sure that, again, now we can see that they are already in a war over in Dudal, so we need to clear that war first. As well as the defense force, they're only the systems, there's no war to clear for these guys, that's good. But we need to clear these guys of all active wars and keep them clear in all their other systems, so we can engineer the war in CD here, so we can engineer that war, and then doing that war, we suddenly get conflict zones where we can shoot their ships, and then we're just going to shoot them out of the sky until they drop below that 2.5%, and when the war's over, we're just going to run missions for everybody else in the system to keep them out of getting any influence in the system, push them down, get them out of the system. So that's how you engineer a retreat. So once we got the two, if you got the two retreats engineered, we got the system cleared, and there's no one, there's now a possible seat in the system that we can take, then we can begin to work on our own expansion as we talked about before. Okay, so we're back in LP here, where we have our own faction, of course. Oh, boom now. If, for instance, we were in a case where there were no systems within 20 light years with room for us, then imagine that all of these systems all had 7 factions in them. They were all completely filled up. There were nowhere we could go, because the maximum range for an expansion is 20 light years. In that case, we now have to look at the state called investment. And once again, we can see investment is a second tier state. And we can see down here, it has a 0 pending days. That means you go straight into investment as soon as your expansion is over. If there was no systems within approximately 20 light years, then you go straight into an investment state that lasts, again, 5 days. And at this period, you can then expand. You can then expand and move into a system within 40 light years. Some places say 30, so I'm not exactly 100% sure the max range, but at least you get an extended range, and you will then get a longer list of systems that you could possibly move into. So again, if you really want to do some long hops and get to a system far away, you have to make sure that you filled out all the systems nearby, and then you can do a longer jump like that. So as you can see, there is, again, as with anything like this, there is a lot of micromanagement and constantly keeping all the different faction clears in all the different systems that they're in order for engineering the wars and retreats that you need, if you need to make room for yourself. Now, you can, of course, end up being in an area where our area is pretty crowded. I mean, most of the systems are full, but you can end up in an area where most of the systems are mostly empty. There's a lot of room for you, so then you don't really have to worry about the retreats, which makes expansions a lot easier. But in our case, retreats are a lot of work. Also, expansions are a lot of work, because we need to first clear a path to the system we want to go to, get a seat. And of course, in similar fashion, I should probably mention this. Let's say that we wanted to expand to Haritana, the system all the way down here. We can see this is a problem because we have 2 systems here which already have room for us, so we would need to fill these 2 systems. So this means now we would have to go into this system, and we'll find another system. Let's take this one, which is very close. So we could see, we could take any of these factions here that is not already in Vukupaun, whatever how it is pronounced. So you would find a faction from this list that's not in this list here. And let's go back there. And if we then engineer an expansion for these guys, they would then expand into this system, which would then effectively blocking that. Let's go back to LP, here we go. Which would then effectively block that system, so we couldn't go into it. Then we need to do the same in that system, so we would probably need to do a cross expansion between those 2 systems. So we filled out the open spot in those 2 systems, and that would clear a path for us all the way down to Haritana. So when we did our expansion, we could then end up in Haritana, if that was what we wanted to do. So again, it's all about clearing that path, and then make sure you have an open spot, so the closest system to you is the one that you want to expand into. Quite a lengthy video, but I really hope that you found it useful and interesting. If you did, give it a like down below. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more BGS videos in the future. And until next time, I'll see you guys in space.